Welcome to Real Talk with Tina and Ann. I am Ann. Today we welcome author Ana Hebra Flaster. When I opened your book, Property of the Revolution from a Cuban Barrio to a New Hampshire Mill Town, I just had to have you on the show. The very first line stopped me cold, and I am not kidding you. I sat there staring at the page, thinking about what freedom really means. And I'm not talking about the flag waving kind, but the kind that you fight for quietly, with fear in your throat and hope in your hands. Ana was just shy of her 6th birthday when her family fled post-revolutionary Cuba. They had 48 hours to get out, and they left behind everything, their home, their belongings, and the life that they'd known. What they found in America wasn't easy either. Language barriers, racism, hunger, and the ghosts of trauma that followed them across the ocean. But through it all, Ana found her voice, first as a child learning to survive, and later as a writer determined to remember. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and on NPR's All Things Considered. And now with her debut book, Property of the Revolution, she takes us deep into the soul of exile, what it costs, what it teaches, and what it means to build a life between worlds. Ana, thank you so much for being here.
Oh gosh, Anne, a total pleasure. Really, I love what you're doing with your show, and I've been enjoying these recent episodes of yours. I think a lot of the themes carry across.
Well, well, thank you for listening, and
Mhm.
thank you so much for being here. You know, we don't get political on the show. We really don't. And this isn't about politics. It's about people. And
Yeah.
your book really made me think about what it means to seek safety when home is no longer safe. Let's set the stage. In the late 50s and in the 60s, there was a lot going on. Cuba was under Batista dictatorship marked by
Yeah.
corruption, censorship, and violence.
Mhm.
Many, including your mother, hoped that Fidel Castro's revolution would bring freedom. But when he came into power in the late 50s and 59, I think, hope turned to fear. Businesses were seized, people disappeared, and families were torn apart. But your family made the impossible choice to leave everything behind for safety and a future in America. You were between two countries, sometimes feeling at home in both, and sometimes not feeling at home anywhere. You arrived
Mhm.
here as a child after living in fear and witnessing so much loss. Can you take me back to when your family had to leave?
That was a great setting of context, and it's complicated. I think you really kind of captured the stage. As you said, my family had believed that democracy would be restored. And then little by little, after the revolution, they saw one kind of freedom after another disappear. And each
Yeah.
family, each family member came to the realization that their dream had vanished and that they were now living in a nightmare where they barely recognized society, Cuban society, neighbors that had lived together for generations in the same barrio suddenly didn't trust each other because anybody could be an informant, because ideology, political ideology, surpassed humanity. And that's always at risk
Right.
in civilization, as we know. And it is, as you said earlier, it's not about politics. This is just what happens. People can glom on to an ideology, and it can be a religious ideology too, and we can lose sight of the human being in front of us. That's what they were basically seeing. But each of them, I call them the viejos, the elders. The viejos all saw this reality emerging at different times and in different ways. So that caused a problem within the family because they weren't all seeing the same thing.
Right.
And when my mother and father decided in 1964 that they needed to find a way out of the country, which suddenly, for the first time in Cuban history, Cubans couldn't just get on, buy a ticket and leave. They had to get the government's permission. And Cuba, until, for decades after the revolution, remained one of the few countries that requires a citizen to obtain the government's permission to leave. It's actually a universal human right, the right to enter your country and leave your country. And that was denied. So as they
Mm.
realized that this was a new obstacle, they began searching for the rules of how could that happen, because the government wasn't announcing how people could leave the country. They wanted everybody to stay. They had already seen a huge exodus
Yeah.
in the years after the revolution. So my parents found out through what they called radio bemba, radio big mouth, which was the word on the street, that
Okay.
if you went to a certain office in the Ministry
Yeah.
of the Interior building and you asked a certain question and you went to another person and you did everything right, you could apply to leave the country.
Mm.
And then that put you in gusano territory. You were an enemy from that point on because you were declaring yourself
Mm.
an enemy of the revolution. You lost your job. You really were at the bottom of society, and anybody could do whatever they wanted to you because you were a worm, a gusano. That's what the government called us. So from that point on, you waited, and we waited 3 years, not knowing if or when we would get the permiso, the permission. And
Hmm.
the opening scene, which you referred to in Property of the Revolution, is of that moment when I, as a nearly 6 year old, I have no idea what's happening, but suddenly
Right.
there's a motorcycle coming into the barrio. I had figured out that the motorcycle meant something big was going down. And in fact, that time it was our family. Our family was the family that was about to lose it all and win it all.
Right.
So it was a moment, and I talk about this in the first chapter too, where my parents' dreams came true, but they broke their hearts at the same time.
Yeah.
Because now, yes, they'd be able to leave the country, but that meant that they knew they would never see most
Yeah.
of their family ever again because they couldn't get out and we couldn't come back in. And that's
Right.
actually an important distinction too here, is that refugees are part of the immigrant experience, but they have a different path into the other country and out of their country. Usually they leave with nothing. Usually they don't want to leave, and usually they can't go back
Okay.
for safety reasons, for political reasons. That was that moment where life was going to be different. It was the moment of the loss of our Cuban world when that
Oh,
motorcycle
wow.
came into the barrio, and it's there's a sound effect that's tied to it. I still, to this day, when I hear a motorcycle, I have a reaction
Oh
to
my
a motorcycle.
gosh.
Yeah.
I never, out of reading your entire book, I never made that connection. And I remember you saying that in your book. But yeah, sights, sounds, all that stuff can
Yeah.
bring things back like it's right there. When
Especially
it,
for children. Yeah.
oh my gosh, especially for children. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was petrifying for you. I'm sure you were just absolutely terrified. Your
Yeah.
parents had to make some tough decisions. I mean, they were promised freedom and democracy, but of course that didn't happen. Leaving family behind was against your culture. And
That's right.
when safety became the priority and you had that 48 hours to leave home, surrender your possessions and step into an unknown country with nothing but your fear and hope, there is loss and then there's loss. And there are so many layers of loss here. You had to leave so much behind. Possessions are one thing, but
That's
like
right.
your abuela had to leave her father behind. Share with me, if you can, the depth of the loss that your family went through.
Yeah. It's the depth of that loss has taken me my whole life to fully understand, because the women in our family were so strong and they were very forward thinking. My grandmother less so, because of everything that she left behind. But the story we told in
Of
our
course.
family, or that they told us, was that we had won. We had beaten communism. We had beaten Castro. We had won our freedom. Forward march. But then as time went on and I grew up, I realized it hadn't been so simple and there had been great loss. At the top of the sacrifices were my grandmother's sacrifices. My grandmother didn't really want to come with her daughters to the United States and leave her father and her brother behind, knowing that, and she was right, she would never see them again. She did it because her brother said, I'll take care of Papa. You take care of your daughters and your grandchildren. When those women and their husbands are working, who's going to take care of those children? And so she did. And it was a time when there was no Spanish TV, no Spanish internet. You couldn't find a Spanish magazine in New Hampshire in
Right.
1967.
Okay.
And that's one of the differences today. These people, these refugees from Syria, Ukraine, and other places where there's political upheaval, there's at least a little bit of a chance that they'll be able to hear their native tongue. And that power of your home language and losing that is another loss. It's another layer of
Oh,
loss.
I can't imagine.
So I think that my grandmother, in the end of her life, saw that it was the right thing to do, but I think it took her a long time to come to terms with that. And it affected my mother and my aunt too, because and my father and my uncle, we all grew up in, as you know, in the same house. And
Right.
we would have in Cuba and we did here in the United States in a duplex next to each other. But I think everyone understood in the house what Abuela had given up and honored that as much as possible. And I think in a way we're inspired by that. Like what we have given up and what she has given up is so great. Let's make this the best possible experience for everybody. And one of the ways they did that was staying together, keeping the
Right.
family together, which isn't
Yeah.
easy in the United States when you have so many opportunities and people
Mm.
pick up and fly across the country for work or for school. That didn't
Right.
happen. You didn't leave your elders behind in Cuba. And that's
And
what haunted them for the rest of their lives. It haunted them.
yeah, I can imagine that that would have been the hardest decision that your abuela ever made in her entire life. And I really respect that that your heritage, your culture really respects their elders so much so that they include them in everything and then they bring them along with everything, that you don't leave them behind, that you don't, I mean, that you keep your family together. I think that that's just so respected. That's the
I
way it
love it
should
too.
be. It should
It
be
should
that
be.
way.
And it's really hard. I'm now the vieja. I'm now the elder.
Yeah.
And I have a tough job here. I'm trying to hold together a 27, 29 member Cuban American clan that is growing up in a very different America with lots of
That's very,
opportunities and lots of
yeah.
distractions. So getting people together is so hard, and
Yeah.
that's what you need to do. It's not about Zooming, it's not about texting or even a phone call. It's the face to face. And that's something in the book, you were immersed in the book. It sounds like that was a day-to-day contact
Mm.
every day, those two
Right.
families, for better or worse. And a bond happens with that you
Wonderful.
can't have. It just doesn't happen. And so I'm sitting here trying to hold the whole thing together,
Yeah.
understanding that it's impossible, but doing what I can. And part of it is through property of the revolution. Now the next
Okay.
generation will know.
Right. I love that. I did want to ask you a question about the importance between immigrants, migrants, and refugees, because you do bring that up in your book. For our listeners, can you help us understand the differences and why this matters?
Yes, I am no expert. It's not like I've studied this, but I have lived it and I have written about it as well. So those three groups, migrants, refugee, immigrants, are all, people who are coming into another country. They're coming for generally different reasons. The immigrant is coming, a regular immigrant is coming because um, they see an opportunity in another country. They have dreams. They want to have a life in that country. They know that they'll be able to generally go back and see their family and return to their culture, and that their family can come. Generally, a refugee is fleeing a climate disaster, a political disaster, war, and they don't want to leave. They are forced to leave.
Okay.
They usually give up everything. They can't take anything with them. They usually cannot return. Their family usually cannot come with them.
Okay.
Not all of the family. A migrant is perhaps not a true immigrant in that a migrant is someone who is coming and going and between two countries or multiple countries. Although in this country, we've sort of lost track of what those words mean.
Hmm.
So we're calling people at the border migrants. I don't think those people have any intention of going back, or most of them. I think in some cases, they should be considered refugees. They're fleeing a massive political unrest. Perhaps they're fearing for their lives, and yet they're being called migrants. And I don't think that that's an accurate term. Sometimes society finds itself, I think, in situations where our vocabulary hasn't caught up yet to what we're
Hmm.
seeing and
Hmm.
so I feel like we're lacking some vocabulary can help us understand what's driving people and what their journey is all about.
Yeah, I think that that's really important that people understand the differences. And I'm so glad that you kind of clarified that because I don't think that a lot of people do understand the difference. So I'm glad that you explained that a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things you had many stories that stuck out to me in your book, but one of them was when there were soldiers that were going into the classrooms and started to infiltrate young innocent minds. And you brought up
Mhm.
about how they would say, I mean, pray to God, and there was no ice cream, and pray to Fidel, and oh, the ice cream is magically here. So trust Fidel
Yeah.
over your own faith. How did moments like
Yes.
that shape Cuban youth and the way that they saw things and the way that you saw trust, faith, and authority?
Yeah, I that didn't experience that.
Right.
But my mother, that scene is the moment that my mother decides this is not the revolution I risked my life for. So the soldiers came in and said, "Do you mind if we teach this class?" She said, what was she going to say? And that was the message. Who here likes ice cream? Everything had disappeared from shelves, and those kids went crazy. Well, bow your heads, pray to God for ice cream. Oh, raise your heads. Oh, no ice cream. Okay, bow your heads and pray to God, pray to Fidel for ice cream. And the soldiers came in and put ice cream cups on all the desks. And that was the
Right.
moment. And so there was no question that education and this so-called freedom of education was for a large part of it, if not the majority of the focus was reshaping minds, young minds, and
Hmm.
preparing a revolutionary mentality. And that was the revolution's main thing was you revered this human being. God and spirituality and religion were not to be trusted. And to this day, religious Cubans are persecuted under this new revolutionary society. It's just not something that is valued by revolutionary society, at least in Cuba. And I think Marx was the one who called religion the opium of the masses. And they certainly believe it in Cuba, the regime.
With you explaining this to me, it reminds me of just the freedom that you experience once you reached here. What does it mean? What does freedom mean to you as a Cuban immigrant who had to run with her family to safety?
Everything, it means everything. And I know that there are people in the United States who think that we're at the precipice of losing all of our freedoms. And I can see some signs of trouble and concern and all of that. But right now, you can still stand in the middle of the street, shout horrible things about our president. You're not going to lose your job. You're
Hmm.
not going to, well, we have some high profile entertainers who've had some issues, but then again, a private company has a right to fire its employees if it decides it's not to their benefit to keep the employee. But what you want to do, and what we've always strived to do here, is keep that separation so that political ideology isn't affecting who can get a job, who can go to school, how you're going to live your life. And that's what happens in these authoritarian regimes, whether they're from the left or the right. You It's a political apartheid system where if you believe the right thing, if you think the right way, you have a whole other kind of life ahead of you. But if you don't, you will not go to school. Your children will not go to school. Your job opportunities are limited. When you need health care, this happens in Cuba too. When you need, supposedly Cuba has this wonderful healthcare system, which is a complete myth. Um, and it is not even and equal. And members of the political elite, the military elite, do not go to the regular hospitals that average Cubans go to. And certainly, if you're
Mm.
if you're opposed to the regime and you've come out and you've challenged it in any way, criticized it, you're not going publicly. You're not going to even be treated. There are cases of people being turned away at emergency rooms and at dentist's office, and no, you're not going to be treated. So that's what not having freedom looks like. So it's everything, and standing up for freedom and being on alert and doing the decent thing and calling it out when it really is being eroded is
Mm.
critical.
Yeah, your mom had a saying, which I won't say in Spanish, but in English, it was make yourself brave.
Yes.
And
Ponte
she,
guapa.
yeah,
Ponte guapa.
and she made those hard decisions based, I think, on a mother's instinct, which I felt as a mom. Even she would do anything to protect her immediate family. And like I said earlier, family was everything in your culture. And your mommy was courageous. Can you tell us more about who she was? Because, in your book, what I loved was it's not just your story. It's everybody has a different story that's woven throughout this entire book beautifully, by the way.
Thank you.
So I was hoping that you could talk more about her.
I, she was something else. She was just this person. She knew fear, but she conquered her fear a lot. As a 17-year-old, when she risked her life collecting money and medicine for the rebels who would one day take over and eventually force her to abandon her culture, her life as she knew it, and cost her everything, almost everything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Then there were examples in the book in Property of the Revolution where she stands up to that mob
Yeah,
as they're denouncing
yeah.
a teacher and takes
Mm-hmm.
them to task and says, "You are wrong. This is a decent teacher. This is a decent person, and you're not being fair." And she risked a lot then because
She
we were
did.
already at Gusano. She also saved the life of the man who saved her when she was caught
Mm-hmm.
after the revolution. This man who
Yeah.
had saved her from being arrested while Batista was in power and she was working with the rebels. A mob showed up at his house to hang him because he was a policeman under Batista. And she
Mm-hmm.
stood up for him then and saved him. And then in the United States, I think you may remember, she risked her own job as the manager of this CVS, one of the first CVSs in New England, because the investigators who came by to detect theft thought this woman had stolen something or had not rung up something properly. And
Mm-hmm.
she said, "No, that woman, I know that young woman, and you're not going to
Right.
ruin her reputation by accusing her of something that I know she could not have done." And
Right.
in the end, she was right, and they found the evidence. And so she saved the girl's job, but she saved the girl's reputation. And
Mm-hmm.
on and on. I could tell you so many other stories like that, but what she taught me was that you make yourself brave. Ponte guapa, make yourself brave, do the right thing, be decent, be a good human being. Uh, and we know what that is. We know what that is. And stand for justice whenever you can.
Right.
And part of the mission of the book, speaking of justice, is, and you as a mom and a grandmom know probably, and you've seen it, that children sense injustice, even though they may not have the words for
Yes.
it, but they know when there's an injustice happening.
Yes.
And I think that night and what happened to us stuck with me as an injustice as a child. And I think that writing the book has been a way of redeeming the injustice, telling the story, and honoring what these people did in the face of an injustice, what they accomplished,
Mm-hmm.
and largely by staying together, which is a big part of the message of the book.
Yeah, your mom, like you said, she did risk her life to support Fidel Castro because she truly believed that restoring democracy, that was going to happen and bring back the 1940 Constitution. But once that did not happen, and communism was everywhere and complete control over the people.
Complete control.
Yeah. Your mommy said, and this is a direct quote from the book, that a certain level of mistrust is essential in life, especially when choosing sides. Her country had over trusted one man and then failed to stop the train as he ran it off the track. They'd paid dearly for that mistake. Looking back, how did that lesson of trust, mistrust, and blind faith in leadership touch your family and your life?
Well, I think in that same page, I talk about how she never adored anyone outside of her children again. She loved music and was a fan of musicians. She was a big, Tom Jones in the 70s and,
Okay.
but she never let herself cross that line of adoration. And you see it sometimes. People put everything they have into a political figure. That figure becomes godlike. This
Mm.
happens with religion too. And so that skepticism stayed with her, and we learned from it. They were very skeptical about political parties in the United States too, and saw problems with both, although they tended toward conservative politics more because of foreign policy. They wanted a strong foreign policy, thinking that they could avoid for us what had happened to them, and that
Okay.
democracy would be protected more if conservatives were in power. That's a line of thinking that's still strong in the Latino community, especially the immigrant Latino community.
Okay.
So that was the main thing: is don't just believe what people are telling you. Always wonder what their agenda is.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the goodness in her and my father and my aunt and uncle, my grandmother, toward other human beings as human beings, that never faltered. That was different. Someone in need, someone needed to be helped, they were going to help them. And we saw that during Mariel. I don't know if you remember that part in the book. There have been many waves of exiles and emigration from Cuba after the revolution. And one of them was Mariel, the Mariel boat lift in 1980. And when all of our relatives from up and down the East Coast were saying, don't sponsor one of those couples, whatever, they decided they were
Right.
going to sponsor one of them,
Right.
thinking that, yes, there might be, because this was true, Fidel had opened prisons and was actually in some cases hand selecting the criminals who would be forced to go on the boats of the people whose families had come to take them. So you couldn't just take your family, you were going to take
Yeah.
violent criminals with you. And in some cases, they also took the patients from mental wards, from psychiatric hospitals.
Okay.
Anyway, so that was the rumor, but they didn't care. They said, no, this country's been really good to us, and we're going to help a couple. So they wanted to sponsor a married couple, and they did. And you know what happened with that? They had a little surprise with that.
Right. Right.
But it's an example of how mistrust, but goodness,
Yeah.
skepticism, but do the right thing. And but trust your own sense of what's right and wrong.
And I think that your mom had a very strong instinct, even with her gut. I mean, she wanted what was right for everybody. She just
She
wanted what
did.
was right. And,
She did.
even if we end up trusting and it ends up not working out, I mean, her, she just wanted the best for your country and for her family. And you can't fault her or anybody for that. She just wanted democracy for her family that and everybody in your country. That was all she wanted.
Yep, she did. And there's this theory. It's still not, it's still a misunderstanding that I think a lot of Americans and a lot of people internationally have about the Cuban Revolution, that the Cuban people wanted a communist revolution. They did not want a communist revolution.
Mhm.
They wanted a return to democracy. And the
Right.
three rebel fronts
Yeah.
uh, all promised the same thing. Fidel was one of those rebel fronts, and he promised that too. And that's not what they got.
Right.
Um, I think that that's a myth that a lot of people who fell in love with the revolution in the 60s, they saw these young, charismatic, Che Guevara, Fidel, rebels taking over a country. They were 30 years old, 33 years old, and they put in them this belief. They saw in them these heroes, these romantic young rebellious heroes who were freeing up the oppressed people of Cuba. But
Mm.
Cuba had a very high standard of living in the 50s, and a lot of Americans don't know that or don't stop to think about that, unfortunately. They had a high level of medical care, education, literacy rates, lots of really solid infrastructure. Their GDP per capita was the same as some of European countries. They ranked second, third, fourth in most economic development categories in this
Okay.
hemisphere. And what they needed was freedom again. They needed democracy. The country had had that, and they wanted to return to it.
And that's not too much to ask.
Yeah, and to be able to speak your mind and think what you want to think
Yeah,
and not have to hide your belief.
when you arrived here in the United States, it was the 60s and the
That's right.
Vietnam War was going on, and there were anti-war demonstrations, race riots, people openly criticizing the president, like you talked about earlier, without fear of going to jail. So,
Right.
what was that contrast like for you and your family as you witnessed the freedoms here that you had never seen before?
I think that it was the one thing that calmed them because as they had just fled all this unrest and a revolution, they thought,
Right.
is this going to happen here? Are we going to have a revolution here? And is socialism, communism? And what calmed them was no, as long as people can go out in the street, protest, write what they want to write, say what they want to say, and not lose their jobs and not have a mob come to their door, there's hope and we're in a free country. And they always
Hmm.
believed too that the fact that they were in New Hampshire and that the Canadian border was right there, they
Hmm.
had an
Hmm.
exit plan. That's the thing that happens. That's the thing that happens when you lose your country is you always have an exit plan. And they used to
Okay.
joke, make sure the Studebaker's gas tank is half full. And you can't undo that experience from your soul. That's what happens when something huge like that happens to you. You can't just erase it. It becomes part of you. It shapes how you think, it shapes what you do. And there's a level of fear that I don't think ever goes away. Maybe that's the telltale sign between a refugee and an immigrant. There's a kind of fear that a
Okay.
refugee has experienced that marks them. I mean, look at me. I'm marked still. And I didn't make these hard decisions. I just got dragged along. But I'm
Hmm.
marked by it. I think about it. I think about what they gave up. I'm still tied to my home, my native country. I worry about my relatives there and what they're experiencing. And our story hasn't ended. And property of the revolution. In a way, I'm still property of the revolution. Yes, they took my house, our house, and our Cuban lives, but in a way, they took a part of me too.
Oh, absolutely. When I saw a lot of the different fears that you had demonstrated throughout your life and one incident in particular really stood out to me as a young child, and you didn't really know the language. You hadn't been here very long, and you were new to everything. And you had a situation in school where a Vietnam soldier visited, and you were so scared. You were
Yeah.
petrified. You froze, and the teacher picked up on it. Could you talk about this incident?
Yes. The man must have been father, older brother, I don't know, of someone
Okay.
in the class, but he just appeared one day and the teacher announced him, Mrs. Drew, my first grade teacher, a wonderful human being. And he had a uniform. He was in uniform. And I had been taught in my first grade class that American soldiers killed women and children. That was what I was being taught in first grade. One of the things I was taught. And so when I
Unbelievable.
saw that soldier, I lost it.
Mhm.
I ran to the teacher. I was hysterical. And um, I still remember how terrified I was for my life because I'd been
Mhm.
taught that
Right, right.
in my school, and I would never have been able to explain any of it, but I felt like she understood the level of fear that I had. Maybe she did understand. Maybe she did, because
She
she
she seemed
offered
to sense it.
protection. And
Yeah.
the soldier was just a human being, and I remember he had a missing tooth.
Mm. Okay.
But I remember him smiling, and but that didn't do a thing for me. I thought we were going to be shot and killed because I had been told that by my teacher in
Wow.
first grade.
I mean, that is the highest level of fear. I mean, I can't even imagine. And then you can't even speak the language very well. And so for you to be able to really even explain what was going on within you, and also, I mean, this was an interesting part of who you were. It came across on your pages and it took you a while to realize the deep impact that trauma had had on your life. And shortly after arriving, there was a child who had died in a nearby house fire, which was another traumatic event after everything that you had already been through in Cuba. And you showed clear signs of PTSD, but kept it to yourself. I could really feel that responsibility that you felt to your
Yeah.
family and that you needed to be brave. And it really felt to me that you needed to be responsible to help keep your family safe. Did you feel
Mhm.
that?
Yes. I got emotional listening to you describe that because, I look back, I was 6 years old and
Right.
I never told anybody what I was going through. But yeah, so this was a fire that happened. So soon after we arrived, and we were living in this, we arrived, as you know, in December. It was freezing cold. There was this fire in a house down the street, and one of the children died in that fire. And I heard my parents reading the paper or trying to understand the account the next day, and it said that the older boy who had woken the family up had mistaken the sound of icy rain on the
Right.
window, that
Yeah.
clicking sound. Thought that the what was he was hearing fire, but he thought it was the icy rain. And
Hmm.
so I was terrified that there would be a fire, and that if it was windy or rainy, nobody would know, and
Hmm.
we would all die in the fire, or we would lose our house in the fire, which is what I finally realized later on was really at the heart of it. We would be homeless again. And I
Okay.
and I needed to be awake. I needed to save the family
Yeah.
because everybody else was asleep. Who was going to save us? Who was
Right.
going to save us?
Right.
That was just a house could disappear, a family could disappear overnight. And as a 6 year old, that makes total sense to you. And so
Well,
therefore,
you had just seen that happen.
yes. And so
You had just
therefore,
lived it.
yep. But that was I cannot understand how I never told anybody what, because as you know, I mean, I couldn't sleep. I had massive insomnia. I slept with my grandmother who cried herself to sleep every night. I'd put my arm over her and feel her crying every single night. Um,
Mm.
I heard voices.
Yes.
that kept me awake. I never told anybody that because I asked my parents later on as I started writing about all this stuff. They had never heard anything about that. They would have remembered that. How did a 6-year-old kid hold all that in? I don't think I'm that brave or whatever, even now, to hold on to something like that. So, and I do remember the song Sugar Sugar
Hmm.
by the
Yeah.
Archies? Okay,
Yeah.
that came out soon after we arrived here. And I remember being in that Studebaker full of Cubans driving somewhere. And that song came on and I wanted to sing it and I didn't sing it because I thought it was wrong to sing when people were so sad.
Oh my goodness. What?
Even
Ah,
though my parents, my as I told you earlier, they everybody put on the bravest face they could and acted happy. And
right. Acted.
um, they acted happy. They we had won. We had our liberty. Um, but I knew, well, at a gut level that people were crying in their dark rooms at times because I would find them. And I knew my grandmother was just, she was wet. Every time I touched her, she was wet from tears. So
Right.
so that's what it was like. And you have no words when you're that age. And maybe the fear was what silenced me from telling anybody. I felt totally loved in my home and protected, but I guess I don't know where that came from, maybe I was ashamed. Maybe I knew that those voices were something embarrassing and strange and that because I knew only I could hear those voices and they terrified me. And I only recovered those memories at the age of 38, I think, was when I finally started looking at what happened to us as a trauma. Never considered it a trauma. Our parents we were not victims. There were no victims. We were
Right.
we were awesome superheroes, and that saved us in so
Yeah.
many ways. And when we encountered discrimination, those poor Americans, they're so ignorant. They don't know how awesome Cubans are. The stories we tell ourselves can really save us. But looking more carefully at them, once you're safe, is also a way to save yourself. My cousins, who I grew up with, and my brother have had a very hard time with the book
Oh,
because
okay.
it has forced them to look at a time that
Mm,
they that it has forced them to rethink the story they believed of their lives and of our viejos
yeah.
and to look at what the viejos endured and what we endured because the kids went through things too. And so, my brother finished the book and, he loved it and he was so grateful and all of that. But as he would read it, he would text me, I'm on such and such a page. This is happening.
Mm,
And he didn't want to look at that. It's a strange um, paradox, right? That the thing that's saving you is the thing that can sink you later if you don't deal with that trauma. And I didn't want to myself when a psychiatrist helped me see that it what had been a trauma. I rejected it outright. That
right.
was an
Right.
American thing to think of yourself as a victim. I'm not a victim. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And that's when the memories started to come back.
Well, I think that that was one of the best gifts that maybe your husband gave you was
Yes,
when he actually pointed that out to you. Why you could be both. You can
could
be
be.
strong and also be like have this trauma within you. And it wasn't weak for you to have that in you. You can also be strong. I thought that that was beautiful that he gave that to you.
He did. He did. He really worked on me until I could see that you could be two things. You
Yeah.
could be two things, but you had to be, I think, one thing when you were in the thick of it.
Strong, brave.
You had to be brave, strong, stay together, and not be a victim. Because if you started to wallow in any of that too much,
Right.
you weren't gonna make it. You weren't gonna make it in the same way anyway.
Right. And it might have been difficult because it's one with your brother and maybe who cousins or whoever else was reading it. It's one thing to say it, it's one thing to write it, it's one thing to read it. All those things add a whole different layer of healing and dealing with what happened to you. And when you're actually reading, I mean, you just want to close those pages because you don't really want to face it. It makes it a lot harder.
Yeah, it's taken them a lot. I had not stopped to think about what it would mean to them to revisit
Mm,
those days and look at that trauma again and actually decide, and I think they have realized this too, the same thing that I realized, which was that, wow, those people, something really huge happened and really painful. And look what they were able to do. I mean, that's where I'm hoping they come out with is yes, in order to really appreciate what they were able to do, what we were able to do, what human beings can do, you kind of have
right,
to know what happened.
right.
That's
Well,
the win on the other side of that pain.
in Cuba at the time, all the newspapers and broadcast networks were being shut down, and the regime began to rule by edict. New laws
Yes.
appeared overnight. Families were desperate to flee, as we talked about, and the rumors of spread that children would be sent to indoctrination camps. Parents began sending their kids to the United States through what became the Pedro Pan flights, a secret resettlement program that eventually whisked 14,000 Cuban children out of the country. And your mom felt deeply betrayed. It wasn't the democracy, like we said, that she had been promised. And she even compared Fidel with Mussolini and Hitler. How do you think that this betrayal affected your mom? I mean, we've touched on it, but I think that there was such a deep layer of betrayal in her that left her, that was left in Cuba and really became who she was in America.
Hmm.
It,
Hmm. Yeah, that if you talk to Cubans who are here or around the world, because the diaspora is everywhere, um, who were of that age and who believed the lies of the revolution,
mm-hmm.
um, you'll pick up that same sense of trick. They were tricked and they were
Okay.
lied to, and it does still stay with people. I know that there are people, Cubans around the world, who still talk about that sense of betrayal, and it's deep. It cut deep. It cost them everything. And
Literally, yes.
yeah, everything. And so, a lot of times I've run into people in the United States who have a view of the Cuban immigrant, Cuban refugee immigrant as having of that era, as having fled because our riches were taken. And when we criticize the regime now, that we're only doing that because we want our riches back and our farms and our banks and whatever. And that's just not has not been my experience at all. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, I all the Cubans I know are working class Cubans and professional class Cubans who lost those middle class lives. And so it's just an example of how there's this misconception about what drove people out to begin with, and what sometimes in the United States, when Cubans criticize the revolution and the regime, it gets misinterpreted.
Mm,
And also sometimes, Latinos, we feel things and we convey our emotions, I think, in a more direct way than a lot of Anglo culture people. Um, and sometimes that comes across as these hysterical Cubans fighting against the regime here in the United States, and they have these and exaggerated reactions sometimes, because in the United States you speak calmly and you're dispassionate, and when you're making your points, they're expressing their sense of that very same betrayal we were talking about. They have a sense of that betrayal, and that's what's coming out, I think, often. And
Mhm.
and it's misunderstood, it's misconstrued.
I think what our parents go through deeply affect us, and we can definitely sense what the generations before us went through. I think it definitely is passed down.
Yeah, as children, right? You don't even you're not aware of it. Um, but the older I get, the more, I mean, I used to laugh at my father when he would think everything was a everything that, like, do you remember Raffi, the singer-songwriter,
Hmm.
children's
Yeah,
musician? He had a
yeah,
beard. He had a beard,
yes,
right?
yes.
And my father was with us, my kids were little, and he understood English enough to know that he was singing about, it was a song, food in my belly. Not all I really need is a song in my heart, food in my belly, love in my family, something like that. And my father said, I think that guy's a communist.
Oh,
And
wow.
I laughed so hard. I mean, I said, what? He goes, look at him, he's even got a beard. I said, oh no, Bobby, that's not what he's singing about. But that's where the betrayal, that
Yes,
deep betrayal and fear. And I used to laugh at that. But
yeah,
now I understand as an adult, as an older adult, what it cost him
yeah,
and why it was there, why he feared that would happen for his grandchildren and his children.
yeah. He was very protective. We will talk about that in a little bit, but I want to talk about um, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, talking about songs.
You were asking about mommy earlier, and I think that is a great manifestation of her intelligence, her wisdom, her insights into the world around her.
I actually
So
wrote that down. Yeah,
yes,
it was
yeah,
so
I,
insightful what she said.
yeah. So like all immigrants, we were looking for clues, especially at the very beginning. What does this country run on? What is valued here? Because what we valued
Right,
clearly wasn't being valued by the culture at large, and we were
right.
seeing this in different ways. But because we were all together in that
Mm-hmm,
house, you could speed up the learning because it's a
mm-hmm.
very verbal family, lots of stories, lots of telling people this happened to me and what do you think that meant? And so one day she asked us, it was Christmas, that first, we arrived right around Christmas time, and she said, ask us kids to translate uh, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And we explained what it was. And she said, so wait a minute, you mean, so this reindeer has no friends because he's different, but then because he can get them out of this jam, because he can do something that they can't do, everybody loves him. And we're like, yep, that makes sense to us. That's what we're seeing out there in the world, in this new world. And she said,
Mm-hmm.
caballeros, gentlemen, I think this country is going to be all about performance. And
Yeah.
I remember her saying that. I wasn't sure what she meant. Later on, I understood. And in a way, it's a very accurate distinction in the way that the two cultures view the world. Americans, show me what you got, show me what you can do.
Right.
Cubans, Latinos are more about who are you? What have you done for your family? Are you a decent person? What like interior emotions and um, dedication to your family, I think. So performance just wasn't at the top of the value scale. Like independence, being independent is so important here in the United States, and it's just it wasn't valued in our culture in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, when you were called tú eres muy independiente, you're very independent, that was a negative thing.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, well, she was very wise before her
Mm.
time. And I think that she saw things that I don't even think that US born people saw.
No, she just had that. There are some people, you know, I used to think of it, that it was just because she was my mother that I saw so many amazing things in her personality. But now I know that she just was truly exceptional in as a human being, and her natural intelligence and her interest in being a good human being, seeing
Hmm.
human beings and speaking the truth and telling her truth.
Hmm.
I feel very lucky to have had her as my mom.
Yeah, she seemed like a really great lady. And your Aunt Tia,
Oh,
she
yep.
was very fascinating to me. She was a very complex woman, and I liked her story a lot. Um, how she wanted to get her master's degree in math, but faced expulsion when she refused to join the militia. And she did have a degree, though. And in your country, from what I understand in Cuba, you weren't allowed to take anything for gain. And so, what did she do? Because I love this.
So and this is another example that I think that resonate with Americans. You know, we're talking about performance, right?
Right, right.
She performed, and she had evidence of what she had earned, her diploma.
Yeah,
And what I'm getting from American readers, her story really gets to them because when we earn something, that's ours. And education really is
right.
one of those things that when you earn it, nobody should be able to take it away from you.
Mm-hmm,
And as with your home, as with private property, when you left, you couldn't take anything of value with you. And a document like that um, was valuable, therefore it could not go out. So she decided she would risk it all.
mm,
And a neighbor who was a seamstress helped her tear it into. It was a PhD in
mm-hmm,
education. She wanted to teach in the United States, needed
mm-hmm,
documentation she knew.
mm-hmm.
They cut it into strips and created a full panel bra, and that's how she snuck it out.